Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Cultured Nerd Podcast. This week on episode 26, we're going to sit down and actually not talk about DC for a change because apparently the internet is being petty and ridiculous and I just want none of it right now. So today we're going to actually talk about another love of mine is franchises that Michael is aware of that's huge part of my childhood was Transformers and G.I. Joes, and the fact that if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what you're doing because the movie's been out a few weeks. The Transformers Rise of the Beast film set up a sequel that they're now confirmed moving forward with, and it's going to be something that you probably never realized you wanted, but you're going to want. So let's sit down and talk about Transformers and G.I. Joe and what that means and what it's going to be like. So here we go.
I had no idea we were going to get right into the year of Mattel, but oh boy, what a year they're having.
Hasbro, but yeah.
I mean, I guess the toy companies finally figured out how to make these movies because I feel like we're talking about these toys, Barbies. We're going to be talking about Barbies in a little bit. So it's so funny.
Barbie is one of those movies that I see the trailers for Barbie and I feel like I'm watching it. I'm like, I see all the making of the stuff. I watched this GQ tour my house of Barbie's Mansion yesterday, and I was like, I don't know. I was watching it. I'm like, I feel like this movie is going to be this dark horse that's going to come out, and people are going to expect it to be something, and it's going to be this existential crisis movie, and it's going to be basically like a love letter to millennials not knowing where their identity is. And I'm like, this is going to be a really heavy-handed movie. I don't think people are ready for it.
I think in a world of so many movies being so, I just watched Avatar 2, loved it, but it's such a wash of CG. The fact that they built all these sets, that there's actors playing on all of these things, I think people want that fun experience.
So you watched Avatar Wave of the Water and you loved it. I watched it. I loved the fact that it was a technical marvel. It was fun to watch, but I also felt it was the same movie again.
Oh, it is Taylor. It's not only the same movie again. It is beat for beat all of James Cameron's favorite shots. The forest blowing up looks so much like Terminator 2. The lab scene looks like any one of the lab scenes he has in his movies. The fight scene, I love that James Cameron likes when aliens kill humans. Because that whole third act where the ship is going down and we see our two, xenomorph water aliens going to town on these guys. I was like, oh, this is so Taylor, there's melting lava everywhere like Terminator 2. Like it's all of his favorite shots. Yeah. I loved it. I was way in for Avatar 2.
I enjoyed it a lot. I really hope Avatar 3 does something very different because I feel like if I'm just going to get a third movie that's exactly the same, I'm probably going to check out at that point.
It's going to be the exact same. The ending, the resolve of the villain of the movie is no resolve. They literally just said, well, we'll see what happens next time.
Yeah. And that's my concern because I saw that Disney announced that they're pushing all of those movies back. You realize that we're going to be 45 by the time this franchise is over. And I'm not sure I'm okay with that.
I can't believe that I will be thinking about getting life insurance when I'm finally watching the end of Avatar.
Right.
You know what I will say? He really likes spending these times and doing these, what it's like living in the village. And I think that's the part that the first movie people really liked. Maybe they need to do a part 1, part 2 with these things because this movie had so many. Like the first hour is just ending the last movie, and then we spent another hour with a whale storyline. So many whales in Avatar 2.
I don't know, man. I hear all these rumors that James Cameron has like a 7-hour version of number 2 planned for Disney Plus to release his movies, a miniseries, and I'm like, the 3-hour cut was enough. I don't know.
Sigourney Weaver played her younger self in the movie. That's her on set doing the voice and stuff like that. Yeah, it's super weird. It's great, but it's super weird.
We'll see where they go with it because at this point, I feel like they're just treading the same water again and again. And if I get 5 movies of the same plot again and again, it's going to be I want something fresh. I want them to be like, and I know the rumors that James Cameron's planning for the ending of this franchise to be, now we're going to Earth and fighting on Earth, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to see crapped out Earth with the blue people fighting everybody. Like, I'm okay with, like, give me that, but I want that already, because I'm tired of watching Jake Sully and family find themselves again and again.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I felt bad. You know what's funny is I kept thinking about what it was like for our friends to have military dads. I'm like, man, they're so tough on their kids. Like the whole movie, I was like, man, it's tough to be a Sully. They have to stick together because everyone else will just kick your ass. They kick their own ass.
I don't know. Anyways, aside from that, I mean, that was what it was. Demon Slayer had its ending. Great ending to the season. If you haven't watched it yet,
I'll get to watch it as soon as we're done talking here. I get to go watch it.
The hour-long finale that they put off. I already knew where they were going. Like Brian, my son, has all the manga already. He got it all for Christmas, so I already know what's got. They executed it so well, and probably the best this animation has ever looked is in this finale. They did such a good job on some of this stuff, and you'll see it too. You'll be like, oh wow, they put in their entire budget for this last 45 minutes.
I'm so blown away that they are giving movie cinematic quality in the television show. Some of these last fight scenes, I've been so surprised with how big they're doing in the television show. It's been wonderful.
It's funny because one of my complaints is how every time they kill one of the villains, one of the what do they call themselves?
The upper five, the upper four.
There's a name for them. I can't remember the name right now. It's going to bug me. Whenever they kill one of them in the previous seasons, they have this like death slash and then explanation of who they were, and then it cuts off. And everyone's like, why don't they explain who they were prior? It makes no sense from an emotional standpoint. But in this one, the villain's like, is my life flashing before my eyes? And I'm like, they explained why this is happening in this way. I'm like, there it is.
The show walks such a fine line, and it's so self-aware of its audience and wanting to have fun, but executing this very serious story. I'm always tickled by how successful they are, and I'm so happy to be along for the ride.
Yeah. And then on a similar transition, the new episode of Gundam setting up for the finale next week. Gundam got so dark in the last few episodes. If you're not caught up, you should watch that immediately after you finish Demon Slayer, because
sure.
The bad guy is painfully shown, and the extremes that the bad guy is now doing to the show and what's about to happen. I'm watching the show and I'm like, I don't see any way that all these characters are going to come out alive. Like the only way that this is going to end is half of them are going to be dead.
That's what happened in Blood Orphans. And you're like, I don't want them to die, but that's exactly what's going to happen. These kids are going to get murdered.
When you catch up and you see where they're at, you're like, oh, everyone's going to die.
Oh,
this is going to be nuts.
Yeah.
And it's kind of solidified itself as probably one of my top Gundam shows now. Like, I was not expecting to be like, oh yeah, the new Gundam show is pretty great, but I'm like, it's better than most of the franchise. Like it's they learned what they wanted to do from like 50 years of Gundam, and they're like, now let's take Gundam to the next step and let's mess with you in every regard and do it as quickly and humanly as possible. It's so good.
Why do you think the Gundam, we are talking about, so often we're talking about franchises that are scared to take risks. And while the show on paper, especially when the show started, it felt very cookie cutter, it's now setting itself apart. What do you think that other franchises could learn from what Gundam is doing?
So I've always liked how Gundam constantly reinvents itself, and that's been the big thing that they do. It's kind of like how the James Bond franchise, every few years they do a soft reboot and they give it new blood, and they honor what came before, but they also add something new to it. That's what the Gundam franchise has been doing. I mean, a lot of the times you'll still get the OVAs, you'll get the side stories tying back to the 1 Year War, and you'll get conclusions to that. Like a few years ago, we had Gundam Unicorn and Gundam NT, which is officially the ending to the Armoro stuff from all those years prior. And they will do that they'll do that constantly. Well, oh, here's Thunderbolt, here's a new side story, or here's this, and then they throw that out. And then they every once in a while, like, oh, here's Gundam Wing, or here's Gundam X, here's Iron Blooded Orphans, here's Witch from Mercury. And these are the side stories that are like, let's take all of the good that we had from this giant plot, amalgamize it into something brand new, And there'll be a lot of stuff that you will see that's very familiar. Even with Witch from Mercury, like the overall designs, you can be like, oh, that's the gun cannon for this show. Oh, that's the golf custom for this show. That's it. And you can see
you can
threads.
you can see the lineage, especially when you see a lot of like the first bad guy suits were all like Zaku's and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They had all of those, like, I was like, oh, these are the bad guys. Nope, they tricked you because that's not where the show's going. But it pays homage to all of those mech suits.
And that's what this show does, is they take everything that's good and they honor it, but also they tell a new story, and they're not scared to be different with that story. Like with Iron-Blooded Orphans, they went from the gate, by the way, the main character is a kid. By the way, he's murdered at age 6. By the way, he's not redeemable. By the way, we're going to kill everyone off. And they take these really heavy-handed things, and that's always the thing. The Gundam show, the Gundam franchise, has always been anti-war PSA. That's what it's always been. It's showing you the ugliness of how war is, and saying, yes, there are good people who paved the way for peace, but they're not going to be a part of that peace.
Well, now that I'm an adult, you look about Gundam Wing and you think about some of the plot points of like back and forth of like, this guy switched sides. And then it's like, that show is all about who's selling who mech suits and who has the newest technologies. And, this person switches sides and gives them, you know what I mean? Like all of that. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty close, Yeah. BlackRock will go to the highest bidders. So, okay.
Yeah. And I've always loved the franchise for the fact that it's very self-aware and it's very on the nose with how it presents how crappy the world is, which is pretty great in its own regard. And this new show, in the last 5 episodes, the second half of season 2, it has not only kicked the door down of what you expected the show to be, but it's also emotionally broken you in every regard. Every character has been broken. Every character who you thought was good, like when you start the first episode of the first season, you're like, oh, this guy sucks. You're like, oh no, now he's a good guy. He's one of the ones we like. Okay, cool. Oh, this is a cool character. Villain. And you're like, oh no, this is a cool mobile suit. Now it's owned by the bad guys. And it's you're now rooting for all the things you liked in the first season to be destroyed. And the fact that they're able to do that to you, you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize how flimsy my allegiance was, because now I'm realizing all the stuff I liked, I was part of the propaganda wheel, and now I'm realizing, oh no, they're all bad. It should all be destroyed. And it's so good.
Okay, so now I know that propaganda wheel is coming towards me.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing that I didn't know, I don't think anybody knew. So explain to people what is going on with Transformers, because I feel like the transition from Michael Bay was not very well known, and I don't think that the soft reboot of Bumblebee was very well known.
Right.
And Bumblebee is a great, fun car ET movie. It's ET except a car is living in your house, and it's pretty fun and silly.
So for everyone who hasn't seen Rise of the Beast yet, obviously, spoiler alert, we're going to be just going right into it. We're going to be talking about spoilers for Rise of the Beast, spoilers for Bumblebee, and everything in between. So here we go.
Also, we'll probably have to talk about the old G.I. Joe movies, of which I only remember. I remember seeing 3 of them. I don't know if I saw the Ninja movie.
That's the 3rd one. There's only 3 total.
Okay, then I definitely saw the first 2.
Okay. All right. So for those who are unaware, for the uninitiated of this conversation, Marvel Comics initially produced a G.I. Joe and the Transformers 4-issue limited series back in 1987. This story was meant to be the first time that these two franchises ever crossed over, because both comics at the time were being published by Marvel and both comics were widely popular. So it was a first time, let's cross these over and do something crazy. The first issue showed the G.I. Joes killing Bumblebee. And the repercussions of that was he got destroyed, and then Bumblebee became something else. If I recall correctly, he became the G.I. Joes ended up saying, oh no, we killed the wrong one, let's rebuild him. And they ended up rebuilding him into a character called Goldbug or something of that nature. And then
I don't remember Goldbug. Okay.
And then he eventually became Bumblebee again. So it was kind of like, it was what it was. But essentially, the Autobots, the G.I. Joes thought all the Transformers were a threat. And then when the Decepticons joined forces with Cobra, then they realized there's a line in the sand. Here we go. As that 4-issue started going, it eventually led to the Joes, the Autobots, and Cobra fighting together against Megatron and the Decepticons. because
Oh wow, both
even
sides had to fight together.
even Cobra realized that Decepticons did not care about Earth, and they're like, "Oh no, we want Earth. Decepticons are willing to destroy it, so we should probably fight with you guys to stop this from happening."
I'm pretty sure it's a John Cena joke, but isn't it? There's Decepticon. It's deceptive is in their name. Why does anybody trust these guys?
Literally that, right? So this happens a lot, all right, in the comics. So they've had more than one crossover as time has gone by. Each crossover over time has been kind of great in its own regard. Like the first one we had as a kids, the 1987 one was pretty fun. I enjoyed it. Is what it is. They did it again in Marvel Generation 2 in the 90s. This one had a lot of the ninjas being involved. A Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes, all of them were all kind of like a big major player. They even brought in the Japanese Generation 1 cartoon, they even had G.I. Joe characters cameo in showing that they were part of this big shared universe. I do remember when we were teenagers, they did reboot the whole franchise again, did a kind of a standalone story called Transformers/G.I. Joe. This one took place in 1938. It was that World War II-esque franchise. This one actually had Snake Eyes get his face all messed up. There's a really cool shot where he cuts open a bullet, covers his face in gunpowder, and cauterizes his face. That was also the one where it was drawn very dark. It was very. Let me see if I can pull up a cool picture of it because it was a very unique looking comic. Because I have the issues. I think in one of my boxes here I have them because we bought them back in our good old days of going to the Oceanside comic shop. But it was a very well drawn comic.
Yeah, with that beautiful cartoon John Hamm man right there. Yeah, that's a great looking comic.
So it was a very fantastic story, and every few years they do this where they keep bringing up these crossovers, and it's just this ongoing thing. Even when IDW took over the franchise of G.I. Joe and Transformers in the comic form, they led more to it. Again, there was even some more newer ones, G.I. Joe versus the Transformers, where the Transformers in that story, with the Cobra seizes control of Teletran 3, they start sending Transformers and Decepticons to various points of Earth's history to kind of redo time. And so the Transformers actually build like mech suits for the G.I. Joes, and they travel with them in this kind of a Gundam-ish G.I. Joe crossover. And there's lots of stuff like that. So
do they make a big G.I. Joe robot? Do they all get together and be a Combine-a-con?
I mean, it would be kind of fun if they did, right? I mean,
but it turns into an American flag with just shoots missiles everywhere.
Yeah. And 1 second, let me just pull up this. And this is what I'm talking about: the G.I. Joe Transformers mech suits.
Oh right? Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, lots of fun. As you can see, there's Snake Eyes, there's Flint, there's just a whole bunch of really just hammy Transformer crossover bits, right?
Okay, so in most of the comics, they team up. I understand that part of it. Do they always get mech suits? Is that always where this leads to?
It always leads to some form or the other where one member of the G.I. Joe squad gets their arsenal updated to fight hand-to-hand with these characters. And that was actually something that kind of threw people off in this new movie. So in Bumblebee, they did play it safe. It kind of felt like a prequel, but it also felt different because there was also some contradictory bits where you have B show up, and all of the G1 stuff, all the flashbacks were all complete redesign and very contradictory to what Michael Bay did. So, I mean, they were not protoforms anymore. They were actually fully fleshed out G1 Cybertronian vehicles. And that sequence, I could watch a whole movie of just that sequence. It was fantastic. They retold the story of how B lost his voice. They retold a lot of stuff. They had new designs for everybody. And the movie ends with the big shocker that it's like 1988 and here are the Autobots and they're already here. So it was another contradiction because obviously in Michael Bay's franchise, the first time the Autobots ever showed up on Earth was in the mid 2005, 2006 range. So here they are in the 80s, and now cut to Rise of the Beasts. And Rise of the Beasts picks up a couple years later. It follows two human characters completely unrelated to the first movie. The main character of the movie himself is Anthony Ramos, plays a character by the name of Noah Diaz. He is a Puerto Rican American. He is ex-Marine, and he is down on his luck because of his brother who has a sickle cell disease, and during his time in the infantry, his brother's situation kept distracting him, kept being an issue, and his CEO basically said that he's a great soldier, but he's a bad team player because his head was never in the game.
So, dishonorably discharged.
So he's down on his luck, and he can't find a job. And one of his friends is basically like, "Hey, you can help me boost some cars, and I will help you. I'll give you a ton of money, and you use your military tech, your military skills, because he was a communications officer. Use all that stuff, and we'll sell some cars." And he doesn't want to do it. Like, he backs out and is like, and like, he's in the car while he's about to steal it, and he's like, "Dude, I can't do this. This is wrong. I don't want to be this." Security guards pop in, start freaking out on him, and he's like, "Oh my God." Turns out he's in a Transformer. He's in Mirage.
Right.
And he's boosting this car while Optimus is like, "Autobots, an emergency, come now." And like, Mirage is like, "I got a person in me, whatever," and just drives off. And he's like screaming, freaking out.
Great.
Gets dragged into it. And then Mirage basically is like, "Look, this guy is a soldier. He can help us because we're obviously 15, 20, 30-foot robots. We stand out. So we need a human." Yeah. And he makes this really compelling argument that we need humans on our side if we're going to stay hidden.
Yeah.
And
like, that makes a lot of sense.
It was like this. It was actually this really well played out argument. Long story short, there is the key, this key that exists, which is the Transwarp Bridge. It's actually a main MacGuffin of the original Transformers. It allows the Transformers to interstellar travel from one point of the universe to another, bending time and space to allow them to do things instantaneously. So it's something that's very used in the comics. It's also used in G1. It's kind of just rooted in Transformers. The way this story plays it is that in the far, far future, the Beast Wars, the Maximals, have this key, and Unicron wants it. So he's sending his Terracons to hunt down the Maximals who have this key so that Unicron can essentially become omniscient and just travel from universe to universe, eating any planet he wants without wasting time.
How far in the future are the Beast Wars?
It's not actually explained, but even in the original Beast Wars show, they're supposed to be like 1,000 years in the future. They're descendants, right? And in this movie, when the Maximals interact with the Autobots, they say, "We're from your past and we're from your future, because we've been here a very long time. But we've also," and Optimus Primal's even like, "I was named after you. You are my ancestor." And Optimus is like, "What are you talking about?" And like, they kind of get into this, and even Primal's like, "Who the hell is this guy? He's kind of a dick." He's like, "He's not the Optimus that I read about and I grew up idolizing. He's kind of an asshole." So it's really cool to see that you have this this whole dynamic where they're like, "We're from the future, but we've also integrated ourselves with humans and been essentially their gods and companions for the last few thousand years."
What Maximals make the final roster for the movie?
So in this movie, they talk about how there was a lot more that arrived initially, and they're not all there anymore. So that was kind of a bummer that they teased that there were more, but it's not explained if they're even alive anymore. The ones that we see in this movie, we see Air-Razor, Primal, Rhinox, and Cheetor. So we see like the main ones.
No Raptor, no
Dinobot, no Rat Trap.
No Rat Trap. Rat Trap, I thought might have done it. You know what I mean? I guess maybe they don't want to have they don't need to have a Rocket Raccoon, but he could have very well been that type of character.
Yeah. But there's also 0 Predacons. There were some Easter eggs to Predacons, which is pretty cool, but they were not on this planet.
Okay.
So the story is a little bit different. The Maximals are not here for the same reasons. They're here to hide the Transwarp key from Unicron. But again, another discrepancy, because Michael Bay's Unicron is Earth, and this Unicron is trying to eat Earth. So another big discrepancy. It's like they soft rebooted the franchise, and they didn't say anything, but people who are paying attention know that they're not connected, because there's no way. Because there's the plot holes, the plot discrepancies are just too massive at this point.
What Decepticons were there?
None. No Decepticons in this film.
This film. No T-Rex?
This film had no Decepticons, no Predacons. The only villains were the 3 Terracons, the 3 soldiers of Unicron.
Okay.
And it was a very interesting story how they did this. And as the story goes on, Mirage gets beaten. He tries to sacrifice himself for the humans. Sort of dies. He's kind of putting himself in like, I'm going to die soon. But he says this thing where he's like, "Hey, Noah, I need you to take the wheel." He's like, "What do you mean?" And then he basically transforms his body onto Noah and makes this mech suit that is very reminiscent to the silly suits that were in the G.I. Joe movie.
Yeah.
But it allowed Noah to fight with the Autobots against the Terracons.
What are the Terracons? What is their B for? Like, it's robot? Are they cannons? Are they tanks?
So the Terracons actually had some really cool throwbacks to original like G1 Unicron vehicles. But the main one, Scourge, he transforms into a really beefy semi-truck.
Cool.
But they also kind of change whatever form they want.
Okay.
They explain in the movie that Unicron imbued them with dark energy, so they're physically stronger, like way stronger than the Autobots. So even the Autobots and the Maximals fighting together are having a hard time with these guys. So these guys are extremely beefy. Like one of them, obviously spoilers, one of them just single-handedly murders Bumblebee like he's nothing, just like straight up kills him. And for most of the movie, Bumblebee is dead. And the way they bring him back is Optimus Primal is explaining that in this valley, Energon naturally exists on this planet, but it's inert. So he puts him on this like pedestal of raw Energon, and when Unicron opens the transwarp key and activates it, it starts to terraform this area, but it also activates all the Energon around the area, which then brings Bumblebee back to life because he's laying on a pile of it.
Does he get an upgrade or just come back to life?
It just comes back to life.
Okay.
But as the plot goes on, as the movie ends, you have like the Autobots doing their thing, saying we're obviously gonna be here. We're gonna find our way to figure out how to coexist with humans because this is where we're at now. And
in the third movie, they're basically setting up for Megatron to come, right? Like that's who we haven't seen yet.
We haven't seen any of the Decepticons yet because the only Decepticons that have shown up on Earth so far were the two for the last movie that tried to kill Bumblebee.
Right. We got the teaser of them.
Yeah. So as of right now, as of 1991, 1994, whatever year it is, this version of the mid-90s of Earth is Decepticon free because the Autobots are hiding, and that they're using Earth as like a hiding pit stop until they can find a way to get back to the war. And then the ending happens. So the ending happens, everything's great. Oh, this is cool, this is great. And then it cuts to Noah at another job interview. And he goes, it's like at this like shipping plant or whatever. It's kind of this kind of podunk looking place. And he meets with a guy named Burke. And Burke is basically saying like, oh, tell me about this big gap in your resume. Tell me about this. And he kind of like nonchalantly is like, oh, I'm just trying to, like, I was just on this job where I was in South America doing all this top secret stuff. And he's like kind of like being all quiet about it. And Burke is like, we know about the big guys. We know about what they are. We know about what they do. He hands him a business card and says, we want to know more about them. And I know that you can help us know more about them because it's our, and he basically is like, I represent an organization that has been fighting a terrorist cell for decades. We are a part of a hidden war. And this war is always on the cusp of bleeding over and destroying the world. So we could use these big guys. And we also need to know if these big guys are a threat. So we want to,
Sure.
It's like, we need to figure out where we're going to go with this. And he's like, take a thought. Tell me what you think about it. And then as Noah stands up and looks at the card, he flips the card over and it's G.I. Joe.
I know. I kept saying that in my head. G.I. Joe. Like,
right?
Yeah.
And then as Burke walks to the end of the room opens and it's like a giant arsenal of G.I. Joe-ness. And I'm like, this has happened. Right?
Okay, so we clearly then have two parallel stories that can spill over at any time. There's more than enough Transformers stuff. I'm sure there's more than enough G.I. Joe stuff. Do you think by looping it into this Transformers world, we see what the 2023 redesign of what G.I. Joe is? Do you think that's what they're preparing people for?
I think they are, because a lot of people don't realize that when Paramount was previously making the G.I. Joe movies all those years ago, they were made without Hasbro in control. And as soon as Bumblebee kicked off the first point where Hasbro has been in control of their IP. And now G.I. Joe is under control of Hasbro initially. So we're not going to be seeing like The Rock. We're not going to be seeing those characters again. We're not going to be seeing any of that again. We're going to be seeing a brand new, probably a formal reboot of G.I. Joe under the control of the license holders for the first time ever.
And if you haven't seen the original G.I. Joe, The first G.I. Joe movie with Channing Tatum is just a wild action movie. They are swinging for the fences. They're trying to compete with what these new Marvel-ish movies are supposed to be. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
G.I. Joe 2 feels kind of like a Fast and Furious movie, right? Small group of people, drive a bunch of cars, have a bunch of hand-to-hand combat. The Rock's there. And then what was the third movie? The third movie was a ninja movie?
The third movie was a reboot called Snake Eyes, and it didn't do any favors for the franchise. Like, it was fun, but it kind of betrayed a lot of the franchise because you have Snake Eyes showing his face the whole movie. Snake Eyes is also Asian, and Snake Eyes also speaks in every scene. And I'm watching this, I'm like, but doesn't show his face. Snake Eyes is supposed to be a white dude, and Snake Eyes doesn't speak. So 3 for 3, you're failing on this.
It makes sense
action-wise, super good.
The new Transformers movie, you mean?
Well, the Snake Eyes movie, action-wise, is a lot of fun.
Great.
Story-wise, it kind of frustrates the hell out of me.
I like that we're already ramping up G.I. Joe because I feel like the thing that was lost in those G.I. Joe movies, G.I. Joes have dope-ass vehicles. Like next-level trains and cars and jets and just crazy technology.
Yeah.
So I feel like, it needs to be a Transformer level of importance.
I 100%. I agree. And I'm excited that what's probably going to result in is that hanging out with the Transformers, being a part of that universe, and having these characters interact with each other is probably going to result in the G.I. Joes being like, we learned some new things from them. Now we can explain where we get our crazy tech from.
Do you think that we see Transformers 3 featuring 3 of your favorite G.I. Joes? Or do you think that we get another standalone movie? Or do you think that G.I. Joes are the first person to fight a Decepticon? You know, you could very easily have G.I. Joe say, hey, there's this weird asteroid that hits in the desert. We think it might be Cobra. They show up and Starscream shows up and goes, hey, we're ready to take over this place. So I don't know. They have so much they could do with this.
There's a lot they can do with it. So speaking to Entertainment Weekly last week, so about a few days after the movie came out, the director, Stephen Caple Jr., sat down and kind of explained what was going to be happening in the sequel, because not only is he the studio loved what he did with Rise of the Beast, that they've already courted him, and they're saying, yeah, you're doing the next one too. As the story goes on, he basically explains that, yes, the movie sets up the G.I. Joes, and here we go. And then he says right off the bat, he says it's very clear what's going to be coming next. We're introducing Joe characters into the world and dealing with that on whatever our characters are going to do. We're also not through with the Maximals. So I imagine the next movie will have Maximals, Autobots, and Joes.
Dope. I love where his head's at. I love that he's already embracing, like, great, let's just throw them all in the blender. Let's just find the story that makes this all make sense.
And I'm all for it. I mean, the biggest Rise of the Beast was that the Beasts were very minimally involved in the story. Like they were very big in the beginning, explaining why Unicron was there. They were very big in the latter half. But Cheetor says all of 5 words. Rhinox doesn't speak whatsoever.
Okay.
And Optimus is awesome, and everything that he did in the movie was fantastic. But that's also I want more of it.
Sure.
So I definitely want to see more of all of that. And as they explain going forward, it's definitely going to incorporate some Joe characters, but it won't go into maybe the true origin of the Joes. Like, first and foremost, it's a Transformer movie. But it's going to be Joe's being like the major players in the film.
Makes so much sense. Taylor, what was the name of the fake soldier group from Michael Bay's movie? They kept
Sector 8 or something like that?
They kept bringing back that same group of guys, that one pretty guy who looks like he's that action hero guy. And they easily could have just been G.I. Joes. So the fact, instead of just having ex-military question mark guy, it just happens to be Snake Eyes. It just happens to be I don't know G.I. Joe names. Strong Arms. It just happens to be Buff Boy Bill. Great. Like, I love it. I love it.
You're so bad with all the characters.
I'm trying to think of G.I. Joe names. Sonya Blade.
No,
Sub-Zero.
You got
Cyrax.
You literally just Mortal Kombat. So we got
Jax?
Snake Eyes, we got Duke, we got Flint,
Duke,
we got
that's the one I was
Roadblock.
thinking of. Roadblock. Oh, okay.
Let's see. Roadblock. There's Snake Eyes. Obviously, everyone loves Snake Eyes. I'm now I'm drawing a blank. Thanks to you. And
there's Papa Explosion, Mr. Nitro, Lady Snakes for Hands.
That's not a thing.
Doom Hammer.
There's Lady J. There's Scarlet. There's
Scarlet. That was the one I was thinking of. Hawkeye.
Breaker. Gung Ho was that one guy who looked like he was part of the Village People.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they all have crazy names.
We got Cover Girl. You've got we said I think Flint was already one I said. You got Jinx. She was a bad ninja that became a good ninja.
Thanks, Jinx.
You got Shipwreck, who was another Village People guy.
I could see a G.I. Joe Transformer where they're on an island with Shipwreck and they have to like protect we have to hold this beach or something like that. That sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot they can do. And I think it would not only breathe a new life into the G.I. Joe franchise, but it's kind of like the nice change that the Transformers franchise is not experiencing. You're not only going to have, obviously, the big complaint of more human characters, but now they're going to be human characters that you're going to root for. They're going to be like,
sure.
Snake Eyes! Yes! You're going to see RC driving down the road, and Snake Eyes is going to do some crazy flip off her back, and then like stabbing a bunch of Cobra soldiers with RC shooting Cobras in his vehicles, and it's going to be fantastic.
And our newest guy who's wearing Mirage's body, he technically is half Transformer now, right? Like it's.
And that's the other thing. So at the end of the movie, in the post-credit scene, you saw that he rebuilt Mirage, and Mirage is still Mirage, but he's not up to 100%. So they're probably going to be sharing. Like, okay, I'm tired now. I don't have my parts fixed yet. Take over.
You take over for a little bit.
Yeah. To be fair, I'm not a huge fan of Pete Davidson whatsoever. He just bugs me to death. His version of Mirage, I loved it so much. There was one joke that was so off key that I was like, this is the best gag that they've ever done in a Transformers film, where like the little kid he goes to his house to pick up some gear, and Noah's trying to sneak out so his brother doesn't hear him. The brother wakes up, sees Mirage, and says, "Who's you?" And then he's like, "Oh, he's a work friend. He's a work colleague." And then Mirage is like, "I thought we were bros. You've been inside me." And like, it was I was like, oh my God, they made that joke. And I was like, okay, there it is. It's classic Pete Davidson gross humor, but it was also the most perfect Transformer joke that they've never made.
Well, now that this door is opening up and we're living in a world with Transformers and G.I. Joes, is there anybody else that could make their way into this party? Is there any other toy franchises that we need to put on the table because they very well might come into this joint universe?
God, the GoBots.
I was about to say GoBots might show up.
Let's see, what other random Hasbro things? Eventually, you'll get He-Man crossing over. They'll like rip open a portal to Eternia, and He-Man will come out. And
I mean, that would be. I mean, isn't that basically the movie Stargate? If a bunch of G.I. Joes showed up and Man of Arms shows up, and he's like, "Who are you?" And they're like, "We're an elite hit squad." He's like, "We're in a war, and you need to know about Skeletor." Yeah, that sounds great.
I don't know. There's so many things that they could do. Hasbro has such a big umbrella for their IPs that we could have so much fun with
it. Get these two fighting on a battleship. We get Liam Neeson back as the Admiral. Big.
Oh my goodness.
And Rihanna, whoever else was in that Alien movie.
Taylor Kitsch, I think, was one of them.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
He's a good actor, but he's been in some weird movies that I feel like never, like he's not going to outlive. Like for every, like, oh, you did this. He also played Gambit in Wolverine, and it was terrible.
You know, what's so funny is it's so funny the way that we think about actors that way. I saw the Kraven the Hunter trailer, and I was like, oh, Kick-Ass is in a new movie. That's great.
Yeah. And that, honestly, that trailer, not bad. Yeah, I mean, it looks like what Morbius should have been, but also we'll see what happens. I mean, the movie is going to be a rated R, and it's going to be pretty graphic, but we'll see what happens.
It looked standard Sony fare. Everything about that felt like a Sony villain movie, and I was like, yep, that's what they look like.
There it is.
Okay. How quickly should they be spitting out these Transformers movies? Do you think that, I mean, if he's already confirming the next story and kind of what he's thinking about in terms of story ideas, I mean, nothing's going to happen right now with the strike going on, but do you think that we start seeing these movies once a year? We're going to start seeing a Transformers movie every other year?
I could easily see a Transformers movie every other year or once every 3 years, and in between that, a G.I. Joe movie or whatever it is that's in the middle. So I could 100% see them branching out their shared universe in a very unique way. Not so much a unique way, a very standard shared universe way, but this is going to be a shared universe that people don't realize that they want, but it's also very different from the Marvel or DC shared universes, because this shared universe has giant robots and the best soldiers in the universe, and they're just humans.
Do you think Paramount Plus wants to do a G.I. Joe show? Like a real slow burn. You don't really see laser guns and spaceships. That's what the season builds up towards.
Yeah, 100%. I could see Paramount doing like, let's do a tie-in project, let's do a mini series, let's do this. Like, I could see Paramount just be like, we need to up our A game and make this a thing. So yes, let's do it.
I also wonder if, because they're talking about this on the movie level, if we're going to see any new kids cartoons, if we're going to see anything
100%.
else to introduce this to a younger audience. Because I feel like I know the G.I. Joe toys are still popular, but I feel like they're popular with collector. I don't know if young kids are still buying them as much.
Young kids are not, and that's the thing. So if what needs to occur, what needs for brand recognition, they need to obviously saturate the market again and bring it back out there. So we're going to see something that like you and I had when we were kids, but we're going to see that for a whole new generation. And then obviously our kids are going to have this stuff that we had as kids, and it's going to be like, oh, let's watch it together, because G.I. Joe's was my jam when I was your age. So they're right at the spot where they know that they're going to make something that's going to happen, and it's going to have both nostalgia and new audiences.
Is the director of that Transformers 2 going to be the James Gunn of the Transformers universe, or is he only been guaranteed one more movie?
He's only been guaranteed one more movie, but you've also got the producers, Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, who's been franchise producer for all of it, and he's been pushing for Hasbro to get more control from the beginning. And he's been saying since like Michael Bay's second Transformer movie that his hope was always to do a Transformers G.I. Joe crossover. He's finally getting his way now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because it doesn't even feel like shoved in there. It just makes sense. You know what I mean? Well, you need Earth to be able to protect us from alien Transformers. So, okay, we now have an elite fighting squad.
Yeah. I mean, like you said before, I mean, the G.I. Joes have been huge forever. And they've always, I mean, especially in the 80s, they were this really big aspect of 80s pop culture. And they've been
that was the last time that they were upgraded. You know, G.I. Joes were soldier toys. And then in the 80s, now they were getting crazy contraptions. You know, the characters got a lot of flavor and stuff to them. And hopefully they get that again and they feel different from each other.
I agree. And I really hope that as this goes forward, like we had one G.I. Joe movie, the first G.I. Joe movie, where everyone was wearing like the X-Men black outfits, and it was like really like leathery and ridiculous. And then the second G.I. Joe movie, they were kind of like a slightly adapting the animated G.I. Joe Renegade, where now Cobra's in charge and the G.I. Joes are on the run. And it took a very grounded approach compared to the first one. But at the same time, you had the bad guys making the Hiss vehicles and all that stuff. So like Cobra got really cool. And I loved everything Cobra in the second movie. Having Troy Baker, who played Joel in The Last of Us, as Cobra was one of the best casting they did in that whole franchise. I hope if anyone survives, I hope he comes back as Cobra, just because he did such a good job. Like his version of Cobra was perfect.
I think it's going to be a bunch of new faces. It's going to be a whole new team. I'm happy that we don't have to have The Rock. I'm happy we don't have to have Bruce Willis back. That they were fine for what they did, but I'm excited to see the new batch.
I mean, the only person that I want to see show up is Sergeant Slaughter. I just want him to cameo as himself, because he was an honorary Joe, and he still is technically a G.I. Joe. So,
do you think there's any chance we get a complete new, like, here's the Mirage G.I. Joe, and we get a whole new team of G.I. Joes, and we only like reference the 80s team?
Maybe. But I could also see them just say, like, here's the greatest hits team from we had. Here's Flint, here's Duke, here's Lady J, here's Scarlet, here's Snake Eyes. Here's the greatest hits, and clearly just establishing that this is a reboot because these are all characters you saw in the last 5 movies, and they're all different ages now.
Right.
So, but I'm excited for the idea that a Transformer movie will be a Transformer movie, but the human angle of that movie and the plot device of that movie will be the G.I. Joes. Like, that sounds so exciting to me.
Do you think this extends this franchise past this little trilogy right here? You think this sets up for at least 2 or 3 more movies?
100%. Because this opens the door for a shared universe that is going to outlive the Michael Bay franchise.
You know, what's funny is we were just talking about Avatar, and it's like, oh, okay, now we'll do it on the water. They've never done a Transformer movie where they're boats and doing like King Kong battles on the water. You know what I mean? And like jumping off air carrier to another air carrier and stuff like that.
Like imagine it. All right. So like they even said the Beast Wars, the Maximals aren't going anywhere. So you have Cobra with their spaceships and their submarines and all this stuff. And then you have Depth Charge, one of the Maximals now who's living underwater, or Cyber Shark or whatever, one of the toy versions that we never got in the show. Like, let's get the water Maximals out there. Let's have some fun with that.
Taylor was real deep on Beast War toys. You had all the characters I had never seen before. You had a ton of great stuff like that. Yeah. There's so many. I wonder, of the group that you named, I wonder if they'll also do like the trans metals very quickly. Because I feel like you could upgrade get them away from Beast and more like alien looking to like get ready for more space combat.
Ironically, that's what the Beast Wars looked like in this movie. They didn't look like
they just look like the trans metals.
They looked like trans metals. Like they're like there's little patches of fur in between the metal, and I'm like, this is season 3 Beast Wars. So they
showed up, right? That's really interesting. So they showed up to Earth, they scanned for hominids or whatever, and this is what they all got.
Well, they were already that way, and that was what was kind of confusing. Was like, so were they on Earth, and then they just traveled back in time to hide from Unicron? Like, it was a lot of questions about how the intro went down, but it definitely looked that way.
Because I know the Transformers were made by those alien gods, but who made the Beast Wars? The Transformers made the Beasts.
The Transformers are the Beast Wars, or the Maximals and Predacons are the descendants of the Autobots and Decepticons.
So the technology, right? So the technology at a certain point is indistinguishable from nature. It's like one and the same.
Yeah, eventually it gets that way.
Oh boy. I had no idea that I had to care about Transformers, but I'm super excited that they have some legs and they are doing something pretty ballsy. And I'm glad that they introduced it so early on so we can get to that. Because you could also just do Unicron again, which I know wouldn't be satisfying, but now you just need the whole Earth to fight against this thing.
Yeah. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm excited to see some new Transformers, some new Beast Wars, some new characters.
Taylor.
I want to see Cobra pull out Megatron out of the ice or something.
Depth Charge is fighting with them, okay? And then they get like in a ravine, right? Some rocks fall down and they're like, oh no, we're trapped. But guess who comes through the wall? Street Sharks! And now Street Sharks can be a part of the fantasy.
Oh my gosh, and then the biker mice from Mars show up too.
Listen, Taylor, do we know what entities live on Mars? We do not. And you could absolutely have 3 dope-ass mice dudes show up. It's a joint universe, Taylor. It all exists.
I'm for it. Let's bring all the weirdness of our childhood back front and center, and let's do it.
I don't think we're going to get any weird animal mutant teenage radical teams out of this universe, but who knows? I mean, funny enough, the Bumblebee 80s movie was kind of like an 80s movie. I'm sure this movie probably didn't harp on that too much, but you could do a period piece and just have all that stuff come back.
One of the things that I thought was amazing about this movie was that it's clearly set in 1994, and the 1994
Olympics,
East Side hip hop, the whole soundtrack was like, I was watching, I'm like, this is the music that we had when we were kids.
So they introduced Tupac and Biggie to a bunch of kids.
Biggie was in the soundtrack. Yeah,
sure.
The girl character, when she was stressed out on the plane, she was singing "Waterfalls" by TLC to calm herself down.
It's a great song. And
I was like watching this. I'm like, and my son's like, "Oh, these are all good music." I'm like, "You have no idea.
You have no idea." The Atlanta-based music scene that was popping at that time.
It's like you don't even know. You grew up with this. This is new for these people, and this is wonderful for this.
Listen, I love modern action movies. They just get kids into hip hop, so I'm totally down for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I love how both Mario and Guardians of the Galaxy 3 got people into Beastie Boys again, because No Sleep Till Brooklyn was huge in both those movies.
Beastie Boys just love it. They popped him in that last Star Trek movie. Hey,
Yeah.
we were talking about Paramount. Taylor, when are they going to do another Star Trek movie?
They were supposed to have already made Star Trek 4, but it's kind of stuck in limbo right now. So
Because of what's his name passing on?
Because of a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, listen, Tarantino has a supposed Star Trek movie that never got made. I would love for him to do, like, say, I'm directing movies and then come back and do Star Trek.
That would be so weird. But it would be like,
it'd be very weird.
I'd be like, Tarantino, Star Trek? What?
I know. Yeah. It'd be a lot of scenes of people talking.
It would be. And it'd be like Kirk and a Klingon just having 45 minutes of dialogue.
It'd be so good. It would be so tense, but it'd be really good.
They're discussing the dichotomy of good and evil and what honor really is, because the Klingons talk a lot about honor, but nothing they ever do is honorable.
Is the Transformers movie easy enough to follow if you're not in all of this lore to, like, as a general audience? Do you think that this tracks with them, or do you think this is stuff that you're excited for because you know where all this is going?
I think that the way they did Bumblebee and the way they did Rise of the Beast, 100% easy to track for general audiences. They spent a lot of time building the world and establishing the MacGuffins for what they were and explaining everything. And for fans of the lore, it was like just fantastic Easter eggs. But for everyone else, it just made sense. So they did a good job.
Well, we'll have to wait another 2 years now, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, at least another until the strike is over to find out where this goes again. But It sounds like this franchise has legs, and they're planning on continuing it to the near future.
It's going to be interesting because, I mean, right now the SAG strike was already voted for approval, and it hasn't happened yet, but it's supposed to happen any day now.
I know. I was told it wasn't going to happen, that they were going to now that they're threatening, they'll work with them and the directors first and then get to the writers last. But I don't know, man, because this thing keeps going on longer and longer and longer, and maybe they need to put more pressure to get this thing over.
Yeah, I think they do. But what's probably end up going to happen is we're not going to get a bunch of movies at the end of this year. So we'll probably get, like, for limited time, that Transformers is re-releasing for 2 weeks or something like that. We'll probably get the studios putting out the greatest hits again. And that's going to be what we see.
I'll ask you here, because we know that there's now an IMAX print of it. Do you think then we maybe see Zack Snyder's Justice League? Because there's literally no new movies coming out, and here is a thing that only some people in Pasadena saw. Do you think that could get general release?
I do think it could, but it also may not happen in an equally stance, because I've heard from behind the scenes that Warner Brothers is working on new director's cuts, quote unquote, of projects that haven't seen the light of day yet, and they're working on these director's cuts as a way to kind of celebrate 100 years of Warner Brothers. 2 of those director's cuts I heard was Superman 4, Quest for Peace, like an actual longer version where it makes more sense than the Nuclear Man stuff, and the Schumacher cut of Batman Forever. Apparently the work print cut has moved forward from enough people, and they're actually talking about releasing it.
That's crazy. What a conversation to be having.
Right. And I was talking to these people about how these cuts are they're actually being prepped and worked on. And I asked them, so why not release things like the Air cut? Why not release things like Zack Snyder's Justice League in theaters? And he said that the big issue is that at this point, the reason why James Gunn took out Gal Gadot and Henry Cavill out of the end of The Flash was essentially out of mercy. He took them out because he didn't want people to get their hopes up for something that's not happening.
Right.
And I think they're also looking at right now, what if we release Zack Snyder's Justice League in theaters? Yes, we will make money. But what would it do to the fans? Would it embolden the toxicity more, or would it cause an unrealistic expectation? It's a tricky thing. It's easier for them to say, let's re-release the director's cut of Batman Forever in theaters, because nobody's going to be saying, hey, where's the next one? Because this movie's 25 years old. But if we release Zack Snyder's Justice League in theater, all we're going to do is tell the fans, oh yeah, just bitch more and you'll get your way.
Yeah, and you're right, because I look at Shazam 2 and none of that will ever pay off, right? There's no way that any is going to happen. Is there a chance now? Did I hear this wrong, or is the Blue Beetle going to continue into James Gunn's universe?
So James Gunn said in his interview with Michael Rosenbaum of the Inside of You podcast that the Blue Beetle will be the first DCU character that we see.
Amazing.
Doesn't mean that movie is the first DCU movie, but that character is going to exist in the DCU.
Okay, and that's the first. So any, potentially things that are set up in that movie could pop up again somewhere else.
Right. Okay. Or that movie could result in a reboot of the character, but we'll still get that character in the DCU. So
interesting.
It could be that by him saying it's not the first movie of the DCU means that this movie's not tied to it. But by saying this character is, it could mean that they're rebooting the character, or it could just mean that what we're seeing in the film will be slightly retooled in the shared universe. So
okay. So it just means that Blue Beetle is going to be front and center, but we might not be this Blue Beetle then.
Right.
Okay, interesting. It means I hope people like the character, because if you like the character, you'll see more of him. And I can see why. I mean, he's a fun alien Iron Man.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But like I've been saying since Black Adam, if you don't want these characters rebooted, go see the movies, because the movies fail, the studio walks away from it.
Right.
And if the Flash is going to fail, say goodbye to Ezra Miller ever appearing as the Flash again. Say goodbye to Michael Keaton. Say goodbye to Sasha Calle. Say goodbye to all of it, because that's it. And I know that there's a lot of salty people out there right now that are like, I just want them to reboot, so just screw it all. But it's a fun movie.
Right.
Why be that way?
Okay. Would you recommend to our audience go see Transformers Rise of the Beasts?
Oh, yeah. I had a lot of fun. It was probably one of my favorite Transformers movies of the franchise. And there's a lot of them. I think there's 7 or 8 Transformers movies now.
There's a lot of them.
This was pretty great. And it actually felt like for the first time in this whole franchise that the human storyline mattered to the plot, and it wasn't wasting my time.
We didn't talk about it, but we talked a little bit about it. Would you tell people to go see the Flash movie?
I would. And since Michael, you haven't seen it yet, I'm thinking about doing another show this week solely on my views of the Flash.
Okay.
Probably going to do it with TJ just because he's seen it too.
Great.
But you just didn't get around to watching it this weekend. So
I apologize. I did Father's Day stuff. We just got busy. The weekend got away from me.
It did. But I definitely would recommend seeing The Flash, and a lot of salty fans are saying, why bother seeing it, because it's going to go nowhere. But it also went nowhere? Nolan's Batman trilogy. So if you can appreciate those movies, your argument's invalid.
Right.
But
well, let's leave that there. We've given our audience enough homework. Go see those movies. That way you can come back here and have more conversations with us. Taylor, flip the next slide. The patreon.com/theculturednerd. We have a wonderful list of patrons. Thank you all for keeping the lights on. Thank you for supporting this content. In a world of ever-changing studio heads, we appreciate that. We don't have any studio heads to talk to. It's just you wonderful people. So thank you so much for all of that support. If you have those cell phones at the ready, give that a scan. It'll link you. Hit Taylor up on all of the socials. Please find us there at The Cultured Nerd. There is so much happening so quickly in the world of fandom. Please check us out. You will get all the breaking news. He's been my the main host, Taylor Murphy. Are you going to say, no, I thought you were going to say something. I've been Michael. Sorry. No, it's fine. I'm Michael Santel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see all you kids and cats next time.
All right. See you then. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.